Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, James and I talk about money. Is it okay to lowball creative professionals? Is working for exposure a valid concept? Where should you live if you want to make more than average at your creative work? Hope you enjoy. Hey, James.
Yo.
So we've been talking in the Gifted Underachievers Clubhouse here about some stuff we both read around lowballing creative professionals. So people who are, at least mid-level in their ability to perform their creative work, and how hard it can be in some markets and possibly everywhere to get paid commensurate with your experience without having to push for it, without needing to kind of set yourself outside of the norm that some companies are willing to pay for creative professionals. So I was reading this study. It's actually the abstract of a study, and it's from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Understanding Contemporary Forms of Exploitation. Attributions of passion serve to legitimize the poor treatment of workers. The premise here is that it's not even a premise, it's actually a study result, is that when somebody's considered to be passionate about their work, which in most creative pursuits, that's the understanding. You wouldn't try to be a visual artist if you weren't passionate about it. It's not the first way somebody would choose to make money. Same with writing, same with acting. There's always this image of the starving artist. So here's the abstract. The pursuit of passion in one's work is touted in contemporary discourse. Although passion may indeed be beneficial in many ways, we suggest that the modern cultural emphasis may also serve to facilitate the legitimization of unfair and demeaning management practices, a phenomenon we term the legitimization of passion exploitation. Across 7 studies and a meta-analysis, we show that people do, in fact, deem poor worker treatment, e.g., asking people to do demeaning tasks that are irrelevant to their job description, asking them to work extra hours without pay, as more legitimate when workers are presumed to be passionate about their work. And this mediating mechanisms by which the process occurs are, first, assumptions that passionate workers would have volunteered for this work if given the chance. So, if you're a singer and they need somebody to entertain the other employees at some kind of work function, they're assuming that you would love to sing for everybody.
It's interesting that they take the perspective of, we have an audience, so we're giving you the opportunity to come sing for our audience, instead of going, shit, we have an audience, how the heck are we going to entertain them?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Oh, okay. So, and this is also sort of more in the corporate milieu. We can come back to this because I did work in event management and I have had corporate clients, and sometimes their attitude is, no, we want somebody, so-and-so works here, let's get them to sing. And other times we need to really make it worth everybody's while to come to this thing. So let's get somebody famous. Okay. So that's one of the things, is that, they assume that if you're good at something and you're passionate about it, that you want to do it for free. You would have volunteered if you were given the chance. And the second mediating aspect is that there's a belief that for passionate workers, work itself is its own reward. And they also found support for the reverse direction of the legitimization process, in which people attribute passion to an exploited person. So that if you're doing something for free, or you're doing something that isn't in your job description, people assume that that's because you want to do it, not because you're being pressured to do it for free.
Right.
Yeah. So taken together, these studies suggest that although passion may seem like a positive attribute to assume in others, it can also license poor and exploitative worker treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I would say that in the context of what they described, that yes, it feels exploitative, and it feels like you can almost substitute hunger for passion. right?
Totally. Yeah.
So, you have people that are trying, no matter what stage of your creative career, you're constantly trying to build.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly hungry,
Yeah.
and they're holding out that carrot to sort of say, hey, if you come and give us your product for free, the exposure, that's your payment. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. There's this idea. Well, I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think that working for exposure is even a valid concept?
yeah. Well, I mean, we have to acknowledge that we've done 2 interviews, and we used Doug's music as our
Oh,
intro,
yeah.
and we used Kath Monstream's art for the image,
Yeah.
right? But I think that there's a context where yes, it's exploitative, and there's a context where no, it is not. So for us, we had them on our podcast. They provided a lot of really great information, and they spoke to the people who are listening and said, wonderful stuff. And hopefully people walked away smarter and entertained and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And they also walked away more aware of Kath and Doug, right?
Yeah.
So there's a trade. And that feels relatively fair to me. And the other thing is we didn't have them work for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
These little
True.
snippets to sort of say, here's an example of what they do as a way to market them as part of, our marketing for the podcast. So to me, that feels like a pretty fair trade. But this other piece where it's more about, a company, and this is where your event planning and management probably really comes in a big way. They are saying, we're trying to get X number of people to come to this conference. And part of the way we're going to do that is we're going to have a musical act, or we're going to, whatever it is. And we can do this on the cheap by not paying the act,
Mhm.
which to me, no, you got to pay these people.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that we're even talking about the Duke study is that there was an article about how, and this was specifically in the Bay Area of San Francisco, how it's difficult for professional entertainers and artists to get paid to not that they say, yes, it's going to be $3,000 for me to be here for 7 hours, and these are these set up, tear down, all the stuff I'm going to do in between. Not because of that, it's because there was an assumption often by the booking people that they wouldn't expect to be paid because there's going to be a good crowd there and they'll get their music out, and how that just doesn't work for artists. It's not free to show up to a place, no matter what your art is. If you're a musician, you've got gear usually,
Mhm.
but you've also got to do all the practice and all of the understanding of the event and everything that you're expected to be there for, as well as your own kind of backdrop of getting trained, of paying somebody to teach you how to play the instrument properly, blah, blah, blah. So I think the idea of exposure is kind of, I personally think it's not a valid concept because it's intangible.
Right.
When somebody's asking you for your stuff for free, they can't tell you 5 people are going to buy 5 different pieces of art or 5 different albums. You can have your stuff for sale, but nobody's obliged to buy any of it when you're an entertainer. And my experience with corporations that hire entertainers as parts of events is they put that in as a budget line item. They will say, "Here's my budget for entertainment that night." And sometimes they want Celine Dion, and they'll pay her incredibly huge bill, like Paris Olympics. That
Yeah. Yeah.
they've got a gigantic budget for entertainment because that's part of the crowd's expectation of what the Olympics will provide.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they wouldn't also have, sort of up and comers, new entertainers or local entertainers who aren't that famous. That they wouldn't say, "Oh, we'd love to have some local artists in this area. Can you just come and
Mhm.
we'll pay you a per diem that's just to cover your expenses," or stuff like that. But my own experience is that if it's a legit company, they will pay for what they want. And if they
Mhm.
can't afford it, they'll pay for somebody who will take less,
Right. Right.
with the exception of Apple,
Oh,
right?
Apple. Yeah, Apple's not paying anybody, right?
Well, that's my understanding is that when they did some events in their stores, this was for Black History Month, and I think it was in 2019, so it was pre-COVID, that they did not offer any financial they didn't pay. They
Yeah.
offered a choice of 3 products, an Apple Watch, or I think it was earbuds, or
Uh-huh.
what was the 3rd thing? Apple TV?
Yeah, Apple TV, Apple Watch, and then maybe some other, trinket that to them, what is really the true cost of giving that thing away, which is probably pretty low.
Pretty low, yeah.
And, here these people are, and I think this gets really complicated because Apple is trying to say, look, we are all about representation,
Mhm.
right? Racial, gender, the whole 9 yards. And so we're going to do this thing. We're going to have a bunch of African American writers and artists come and be part of a panel and read and, et cetera, for
Yeah,
Black History Month. So
yeah.
we're going to use that to sort of market DEI.
Mhm.
And by the way, we're going to reach out and invite them, and we're going to basically exchange exposure for them coming and helping us out with representation,
Yeah.
which feels really, really bad.
Feels like
I
a
mean, it
terrible idea.
look good at all. There's lots of avenues to explore with that, but it raises one question that I'm wondering how you would feel. So, does it matter who's doing the outreach, right?
Mm.
So, if Apple is going out to these people and saying, "Hey, we've got this event. This is what it's about. Will you come and read? And by the way, we've got some things that it cost us probably about $5 and to you." Versus maybe a community of African American writers who go to Apple and say, look, you're going to have this audience. We'd like to come and talk to them and make them aware that these artists are in their community. So who's doing the approach? And then how does that establish sort of this inferred responsibility of payment or this inferred acceptance of exposure as payment?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one because, like, for me, I think it does matter who approaches who. I also think that if I, as a person, the only skill I have artistically is writing, and the only thing I can do in public around writing is read out loud the stuff I wrote. When it's a nonprofit, that's one thing. Or if it's a cause you really care about, like, let's say, I don't know, the SPCA wanted
Hmm.
a bunch of people who write stories about animals to go read those.
Hmm.
I think it's legit to ask for volunteers because it's in a way it's donating your time to a cause you believe in. But if it's a $1 billion corporation
Yeah.
who says, Here you go, here's a set of earbuds,"
Hmm.
and they're using it as sort of a terrible surface idea. I don't know how this one didn't get shot down in meetings, but to go to pretend that they give a shit about the DEI. And then the other aspect is, who in an Apple store is there to see art? They're there to buy
Yeah.
a product or to find out about a product. So it's kind of a weird venue. But all of that being said, I don't buy it when the corporation is making $1 billion. I don't buy that's legitimate for them to offer their product in reward,
Hmm.
as for artists who are showing up. And you can't pay bills with a new TV or a new
No,
Apple Watch. It's
no.
just, it doesn't work with most artists that I'm aware of. I can't pay my hydro bill with gear. I need money. And so I don't believe that exposure it doesn't mean anything because it's so intangible and you can't measure it. And it's not the same as bartering.
Mhm,
It because you can't measure exposure unless there's like an influencer who has 500,000 followers or something. And in that case, sometimes you have to pay them to get your stuff
mhm.
showcased. But the problem there is there's no way to know how many of those 500,000 followers are going to actually buy your stuff. So it also seems a bit too intangible.
Yeah, well, and again, this I think it gets really complicated because if you for your book, right? You reach out to different podcast people who have large audience and that kind of thing. You say, "Look, I have this new book. I think it's going to resonate with your audience. I'd love to come on and talk about it."
Oh, that's a good idea. I should do that.
Yeah, well, I'm all about leveraging somebody else's platform, right? But the point of that is that there's this exchange where the podcast host or owner is looking for compelling content to give to their audience, to grow their audience, to grow the podcast and that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
so you're kind of helping them out by saying, look, I have this new book. It's really compelling. It's really interesting. It, is relevant to your audience, et cetera, and I'm going to bring my own audience too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, that feels like a good trade. That feels like a good marketing deal.
Yeah.
But this piece where it's more like a wealthy corporation, which just because they're wealthy kind of feels worse, right? If they've
Yeah.
got this money, they should be willing to pay an artist. But where they're more in the position of, we have an audience we need to entertain. And so we're going to try and leverage that to get these people in to, work for free, basically.
Mhm.
Right. Which you wouldn't do that for a chef, right?
No.
You wouldn't go to Bobby Flay or whoever and say, "Hey, we've got 1,000 people we have to feed. It's great exposure for you to come in and feed them."
Yeah. No.
And these concepts that were in there was that a story too, that NPR did, where they talk about passion as exploitation, and I could say, you could also say hunger as exploitation, right? Because there's always people who want to get started, who are trying to get their foot in the door, who, if you turn to one person and they say, no, I'm not going to do it for free, I want you to pay me, then there's going to be somebody right behind them who's going to say, yeah, you have an audience, I'll do it for free, of course.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then that leads to what they call passion wages, which is that exchange of exposure kind of
Yeah.
thing. So to me, and I'm wondering too, since we're writers and editors, what's kind of the equivalent? And I've been approached, it's been a little while, but sometimes approached where it's like, hey, can you contribute a chapter, or can you contribute a short story to this bigger book that we're doing?
Really.
And, we want to use it as outreach for this or for an arts committee, and for us that's a really dangerous game to play, because if we give them a short story, that takes that short story off the market, and
Mhm.
it's a lot of hours to do that short story. And if we
Yeah.
give them an excerpt from an unpublished novel, what are the implications for trying to get published, right?
Yeah.
Can you use that actually to say, hey, people are interested in this novel because somebody asked me for part of it? Or does that then sort of say, no, it's already been published, so I'm not really that interested?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's a lot of really tough questions. And I think artists generally, or just creatives generally, get people who are thinking, oh, we can get so and so to come in and do a painting demonstration, or to come in and do a songwriting demonstration. And they're going to be so overjoyed to have an audience that that's going to be enough. I don't know what the answer to that is. I know part of the story that we were talking about, there are people who are trying to figure it out. And one of them said, do a boycott, right? She was a jazz musician and they were getting paid like $20 or $40 per member of the band to play a gig,
Wow.
which, crazy low.
Yeah.
Uh, so they tried to do a boycott, but then of course there's all these musicians who are more than willing to
Yeah.
have a, and so that didn't work out. And so she then said, maybe there's legislation at the local level that can be done to reward businesses for properly paying the artists that they have in, right? So there's a little bit more support, a little bit more leverage behind getting paid.
Mm. Well, I'm just thinking too. So, in addition to the idea that there might be, let's say, writers or musicians who will donate that story, or who will show up and play a gig just for bus money or whatever. There's that side of it. And then from the writer's perspective, let's say somebody asked for your story, it was just sitting there for 3 years. Now you have a publication credit, which then you can use to qualify for things in grant applications, which are top of mind for me right now, because they
Well,
need you to demonstrate background in the artistic practice that you're applying under. And so there's times where that publication credit might be worth it if you don't think you can sell that story elsewhere. And then there's this whole thing we talked about before, which is kind of the sort of information economy, maybe, but we didn't talk about it in those terms. It's like there's so much free content already out there in the blogosphere. I have a newsletter, I have a blog which has been dormant for a while, but I was putting out 1,200 words a week just for free, because I thought, why not? I got this stuff. I can put it out there, or I'm interested in this topic. I'll write about it and put it out there. So there's already this sort of economy of doing stuff for free because you think it'll do you some good in the long run. It might get you a bigger mailing list of people that when you do have something to sell, you can let them know. So let's say you got 1,000 person email list, and then that's immediately 1,000 people who wouldn't otherwise have heard about your thing because we don't have giant advertising budgets that you could just email them and say, I did this thing. Here's where you can buy it
Mhm.
if you want to. So there's this whole creative industry thing around people creating products and articles and all kinds of stuff on spec and
Right.
then just putting it out there as a way to build their own audience. So it's not that far a step to go, oh, maybe it's okay. This other person has a much bigger audience. I can do my thing for their audience and see if I can get more names on my mailing list. But
Mhm.
I think what it can do is you can end up just being that person who's established for yourself and for the world that you will work for free.
Right. Right.
Right. So what I try to do is either have an end game, either want to do the stuff so much that I will do it for free, or to ask myself, what's in it for me? Like, why am I doing this? If there's no money involved, what is in it for me that makes me want to do this?
Mhm. Yeah, and so there's that altruistic part of our souls, right?
I don't think I
Where you
have
want
one.
to do good things, right? I don't know about that. Where you want to do good things, right?
Yeah.
And so there's desire to placate and make people happy, be a people pleaser, right? I think it really gets complicated. There's like these extremes, right? There's the two ends of the spectrum where on one end, it's obvious. So the SPCA calls up and says, look, we've got this ridiculous number of animals that are coming from hurricane affected areas. We can't house them. A lot of them are going to kill shelters. We're trying to raise some money so that we can care for them. Can you please contribute? Whatever it is that you do, whatever it is, can you please
Mhm.
contribute so we can save some animals' lives? And then, yeah, of course, right. And then the other extreme is Apple saying, "Hey, we want to at least look like we're have strong representation. So let's get a bunch of African American writers into our store
Mhm.
and not pay them." Right. That feels kind of that bad side, or any other example where somebody says, I have an audience that I need to entertain and I need to draw in more of an audience, so I'm going to try and get musicians, whoever, to do this for free for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
right? But then there's all that gray middle zone where, yeah, what's in it for me? I want to do it, it feels like it's something I want to do, but really at the end of the day, is there anything in it for me, or am I going to spend a lot of time doing work for free that, at the end of the month, I'm going to be short
Mhm.
uh, for my bills. And then there's the other thing too, where you were talking about you could use it as a publication credit for a grant. And my warning would be, as I'm going through all the grants that I'm looking at,
Yeah.
they are really specific that if you are doing this as a published writer, it has to be something that's curated, right? It can't be just a random type of thing. And so it has to be, a literary magazine of note, or,
Oh, I see.
a mainstream publisher,
Yeah.
these kinds of things. It can't, like, that may not qualify. So you have to think about that too. Like if you're thinking, oh, okay, it's going to serve a couple of purposes and one of them I can use it to buff up a grant application. Well, maybe not,
Maybe
right?
not. Yeah, if you're writing for uh the 55 plus magazine, a little 300 word thing about what's the best depends, or or the other one. That might not get you money from from a creative artistic organization. Yeah, yeah. I think it's gotta be like working for exposure. I think it is a scam if it's offered in the spirit of, yeah, we just don't want to pay people. Because
Yeah.
maybe the organization or the company thinks it's going to open a can of worms if they start paying for entertainment, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, every time we do one of these things, we're going to have to pay somebody 5 grand to pop in and do this, which sure. And then it was interesting too, still keeping to this grant thing, which is interesting that one of the people in the story who's a musician says, one of the ways that maybe we need to think about how we get paid as artists is through grants.
Yeah.
And that's which feels kind of sad to me that the only way that artists can get paid nowadays, or that grants would be, or seems to be becoming a critical revenue stream, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Really interesting because, the thing I found out about grants so far is that they're a tremendous amount of work to apply for. And you would think that the person whose work is being bought by corporations or, individuals is not their ability to write a grant, it's their ability to paint or to dance or to sing, or to write. So it's really sad if you got to learn how to get better at this other thing because you're not getting paid for the thing that you have worked your whole life to understand how to do and that you've gotten to a certain level where people actually want you to do it. They just don't want to pay you for it.
yeah,
And maybe because of like, even I'm a small business person. I'm not physically small, but my business is small.
yeah, you're tough. You're tough.
I'm not gigantic. Don't get me wrong, but my one of the things my mom says, she knows I work long days, and she's like, what does she say? Oh, I know how hard you work, but of course you love your work. And I'm like, what's that got to do with anything? It's like my sister's the baker. She works really hard too, but it's irrelevant whether she loves her work. She still has to get paid for it. It's just,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not.
She shows up and there's a paycheck.
Yeah, and it's a 35-hour week, which, and this is my choice. I totally understand that. But the idea that loving your work is an excuse or like a reason why it's okay to make less money than other people, these are not things my mom's ever thinking about when she says that, but she is reflecting this kind of societal idea that if you love your work, it's not that important to you whether you get fairly
Yeah,
compensated for it, and in fact, it's hugely important. You can't continue to love your work if you're not making a living.
yeah, yeah. And and we're trying to make a career of it, and so it's hard enough because it's so intensely subjective.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the internet, I think, has hit everybody really hard. I mean, it's created a lot of opportunities for sure, but it's also, it used to be, I remember reading about Kurt Vonnegut, and while he was writing one of his novels, he was writing short stories and getting paid like $1,200
Yeah.
per short story. And there was tons of markets that were open to him,
Yeah.
right? And that's back in the 50s,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
in the 60s, right? And now I got paid for a short story. I got paid $150, which was wonderful
Mhm.
and generous. But the days of being able to make money as a short story writer are pretty much gone,
Long gone.
I
Yeah.
mean, unless you're getting grants to do it. And same with poets. I mean, poets, I think, thrive. It's like MFAs, writers, workshops, and conferences, grants. That's how they're doing it, or working at the local bookstore.
Yeah. Or teaching as a, what do they call them? Adjunct? Maybe
Yeah,
in academia, but they don't really make a living either. They're making really terrible pay for incredible amounts of work.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would say, sort of round the discussion out, is that there's more questions than not.
Yeah, for
This,
sure. I
and
think so. Yeah.
I definitely feel like we both are pretty much on the same page. But at the end of the day, if the New Yorker called me up and said, "Look, we'll publish your story if you're willing to accept getting paid half, or something like that," I would probably say yes.
No, I would tell them to fuck off because that's ridiculous. They pay everybody else. And actually,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to get in trouble with the New Yorker, because I don't would do that.
yeah, that's a
But
hypothetical situation. Yeah.
you know, but the chance to get that publishing credit, that goes a long, long way.
Yeah, true. And actually, if I had a hope in hell of writing a story that the New Yorker would publish, I might be more in your side, but I'm so far away from that. But here's what I think my sort of golden ideal would be in terms of artists getting paid. for their work fairly is that their prices that artists set for whatever they're doing are sustainable. They're high enough that they can continue to do the work they want to do and grow their artistic practice and their even their business practice, around whatever they're selling. So that would be the norm. And doing work for free would be the rare, rare exception when it's a cause you want to support or somebody you
Mhm.
really feel strongly about, or, so that it would be flipped, so that what is now the exception is actually the norm. People who do jobs that are writing books, creating artwork, visual arts, anything, they're getting the money they need to live on plus some, not just subsistence level,
Mhm.
but just being able to charge what they need to charge in order to keep doing the thing that they have proven that they can do and that they're good at and that people want.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's don't give yourself away.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have an economy, it's a fact of life. And while we would love to see, more public pressure put on supporting artists because, we're willing to spend a ton of money on the airline industry and absolutely zip on people who write and create art and all that kind of stuff, which is
Oh,
unfortunate. If those people aren't going to value you, then you have to value you.
yeah.
And it's tough. It's really, really hard. But I think maybe that's the bottom line.
Yeah. I think you're right. Because you can lowball yourself and stay at a level that is unsustainable if you're not really careful to keep pace with inflation and to keep charging what you're worth.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, and then can we end this with this one little data point that I think is going to surprise you?
Yeah.
So, I got this from ziprecruiter.com and it's based on, it's recent, October 18th, 2024. And it's the cities with the highest paid creatives,
Ooh, ooh.
right? And so this knocked my socks off. Number one on their list of highest paid, median, not
Mm,
so, take that with a grain of salt. There's
yeah.
somebody making $1 and probably somebody making like 3 million, but
Yeah.
median income, the highest one, highest city is Nome, Alaska.
Are you kidding?
I kid you not.
In the world or just in the US?
Well, in the US, in the
In the
US.
US. Okay. Okay. Okay.
So,
I wonder if I should move to Nome.
yeah. And then the rest of them, I'll read the rest of the list, right? So you've
Yeah.
got Nome, Alaska at the top, right? So Nome, Alaska, annual salary $83,820.
What the hell?
Yeah. Sunnyvale, California, 80,745. Livermore, California, 80,703. Redwood City, California, 80,656. Vacaville, California, 77,936. Berkeley, California, which that makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That sounds about right. 75,386. Novato, which that sounds right too, because that's a community just north of the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco.
Yeah.
75,273. And then this next one makes sense. Cambridge, Massachusetts,
Mm.
$75,192. Santa Rosa, California, 74,637. And then the rare California or exception to California, Bend, Oregon,
Man.
74,187. And if I mispronounced Oregon, feel free to correct me,
Right.
people. So you've got 1, 2, 3 that are not California.
Wow. Does California have a bunch of subsidies for arts?
That's what I got to think. That or the movie industry is so huge
Mm.
that it skews, and these are people like Redwood City maybe has a lot of screenwriters, you know,
Mm.
who knows?
Wow.
Uh, so maybe it's skewing the data. Yeah, but that blows me away. And then Nome, Alaska, what the heck is Nome, Alaska doing?
Well, I wonder if it's also the price of living up there is really high. Like a loaf of bread probably costs $9 because they gotta.
Yeah, but nonetheless,
No, you're right.
it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, Cambridge, Mass, huge cost of living, 75,000 per year in Cambridge, Mass is not that much money for that
No.
area.
It's like what, like, like a sort of a mid-income,
Maybe. Yeah.
if that.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. I have to look at the data, but I mean, it is a very, very expensive housing market, to
Yes,
say
well, that's the thing, right? Because
the least.
yeah,
So take that list as you will. I think there's more homework to be done, and maybe a future segment we can kind of dive into this kind of stuff. It's really fascinating. I mean, New York is not on the list,
yeah, right.
right?
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. I wonder, and I'd really be interested if there's a global list to be found because my guess would be somewhere like Amsterdam, where just art is very important. Like it's part of the
Yeah.
culture. But I don't know. It could be uh that I'm completely off
Off the rails, off kilter, off the grid.
off kilter, zooming down the track with no brakes.
Yeah, maybe the next step is to do this global list and then see on that list the countries or the areas that have lots of supports for people who are artists.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you think? Have you ever taken less money than you normally take for a gig because you wanted the exposure? Do you think there's such a thing as measurable exposure? So many questions, so little time. Thanks for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a comment, leave a note in the chat, or send us an email to giftedunderachievers@substack.com, and we'll write you back. Hope you have a great day. See you next time.